Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of What Would That Sound Like? The show where I take the ideas of today's top thought leaders and break them down to show you how you can communicate them to your teams, companies, and conferences. I'm Sean Patrick, and today we're breaking down part 2 of Simon Sinek's Finding Your Why. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch the video from last week, we talk about the importance of finding your why and why that makes you appealing. Go ahead and take a second and watch that right now. I'll wait. All right, welcome back. Today we're breaking down part 2 is the application is how do you find your why and ways to do that. I mentioned this in the last episode. This is a great thing to do with your department, your team. You can absolutely do it in a conference and keynote setting, but it really will make your team feel like you care about them as a person and not just an employee. So without further ado, let's take a look at part 2 of what that would sound like. So we talked about the why is important, why it makes you appealing, all of that, but the real question is not whether or not it's important, whether or not it's good, but the real question is how do we find our why? What does that look like? So I'm going to give you 2 to 3 different ways to do that, to discover what it is that you're passionate about, what sets you apart. Yes, you do sales and you do that in the office by making cold calls, but why do you do it? What makes you different? What sets you apart? And in order to figure that out, in order to tap into that, you got to look deep inside yourself. So the first tip that I'd give you to figure out what your why is start to think about your formative stories. Growing up in your childhood, your teen years, even recently, what are the stories that stand out in your mind? Not just that was fun or funny or embarrassing or cool, but what was something that was really formative for you and helped shape you into the person that you are? Now, to be clear, these can be good stories and these can be bad stories. Some examples in my own life. Before my dad passed away, he would always tell me the story about when I was a toddler, 3 or 4 years old. I was in preschool. He was telling me the story of I was on the playground, he was behind the fence, and he was just watching me like a dad does before he left. And I was playing with 2 plastic bowling pins. And a kid came up to me and he took one of the bowling pins. He said, "I remember looking at you," and you looked up at the kid, you looked down at the remaining bowling pin, and you handed it to him. And he walked over and you started playing on the slide. Now, I didn't understand the importance of that story until I got older. When my dad would talk to me about that, he was talking to me about how he saw as a kid, 1, I wasn't really confrontational, but 2, I had this willingness to be giving. If someone had something that would benefit them that I had a desire to give it to them. So being giving or gracious has been something that's always been a part of my life. Fast forward, probably 20 years after that, 10 years ago when my dad died, my mom and I were the primary caretakers for him as he passed away from cancer. I'll never forget watching my mom, who at the time was divorced from my father, love and care for this man who was on truly his last leg, his last breath. And as a 19-year-old, I had a large responsibility to take care of him. I'll spare you the details, but it was something that was some of my darkest times. But at the same time showed me that there's a compassionate side that I have, even to a fault where I can get burned out because I want to give of myself to make people happy or comfortable. So there's a very hospitable side to who I am as well. These are just 2 examples from my life of stories, both positive and negative, that have helped me understand what makes me who I am, what my why is, what I'm passionate about. So as you're thinking through those stories, think through the things that are formative to who you are. And as you start to tell those stories or write those stories down, if you're a journaler, write them down. Start looking for those common themes, whatever it is, generosity, passion, excitement, helping others, sticking up for the little guy, the underdog, whatever that is for you. Try to find those common threads, and that will help you understand what your why is and put that together. The second thing is you can ask someone close to you. Ask a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, a coworker who you're friends were very close with. Ask a friend of yours, maybe it's a parent or a sibling. Ask them, hey, what do you see in me? You've seen me my whole life. You've seen me for these last 6 months, however long it's been. What do you perceive that I'm passionate about? What do I get excited about? Have them get to speak into your life a bit and take some notes on what that is. or on the things that they say. And the next thing I'd say is if you have someone who's not as familiar with your life, but still is someone you trust and is close to you, those formative stories that you decided and you went through in step one, tell them those formative stories. And don't tell them your take on it. Don't say, and now I know I'm a great person because of it. Just tell them the stories and see what they gather from it, and listen to them and see what common threads they pull out that maybe you missed. The third and bonus thing here is to try to see what gets you excited, because that will help you understand what your why is, what you're passionate about, and even more poignant and something we easily overlook, not just what gets you excited, but what breaks your heart. If you can hone in on what breaks your heart, you'll find the things that you're passionate about. You'll find the things in the world that you want to change, that you want to be a force for good in that change. So the third thing is find what excites you and find what breaks your heart. That'll help you put together what your why is. Now, we've talked a lot about this idea of finding your why, but I want to give you some examples so you knew what it sounded like, because sometimes it's hard to figure out. I think I conceptually understand it, but I don't know how to put it into words. So I'm going to give you a couple different examples of people's whys. For instance, the first one, Tony Robbins. Many of you know who Tony Robbins is, so I'll spare you the introduction. For him, I went to his LinkedIn page and saw what he wrote. This is literally what it says, and it's so perfectly his why. Tony Robbins, his why is to help people break through and take their lives to another level. I say it like that because breakthrough was all in caps. That's how he wrote it, so that's how I'm saying it. But his why, it's not to be an author. It's not to be a motivational speaker. That's not his why. That's his what. That's his how. His why is to help people break through and take their lives to the next level. Your what and your how isn't necessarily inspiring, but your why needs to be. Now, what about the author of this book, Finding Your Why? We should probably figure out and hear what his why is. Simon Sinek. I went to his LinkedIn page. What I love is there's people on LinkedIn that say what they do. CEO of blah, 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 VP of blah, 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 head of blah, blah, blah. And that's fine, but it's the what. But what always catches my eye, what catches my mind is when people say their why. Here's what Simon had to say. His why is to inspire people to do what inspires them, so that together, each of us can change our world for the better. Let me say that one more time. His why isn't to be an author. His why isn't to inspire people to find their why. It's not even that. It's to inspire people to do what inspires them, so that together, each of us can change our world for the better. It's a pretty great why. So for you, as you're piecing together your why, as you're thinking about this, and honestly, some of you are probably thinking, this is good, but do I really even need to do this? Well, the truth is, if you don't know your why, it can really be detrimental to you, to your health, to your happiness, to your relationships, to your work balance, to your work happiness. You may feel frustrated. You may feel fatigued. You may feel tired. You may feel like you're never progressing ever anywhere. You're not getting to where you want to be, even though you're putting 8, 10, 12 hours in a day. The truth is, the why, and your why is your purpose. And your purpose, it will drive you and it will give you energy. When you're just doing the what and the how, it can be really tiring. And when you don't have that why to guide you, to show you where to go, even if you are making progress, sometimes you're not even sure about that. So your why is your purpose, and it'll drive you and it'll give you that energy to keep going. And in the same way that you can't drive a parked car, you can't confidently get to where you need to be, to where you want to be, without knowing your why. Because your why is your fuel. Your why is your purpose. So finding not just the what and the how, but knowing the why of what you do will give you that energy, will give you that passion to keep going, to break through to the next level, to get to where you want to be. So find your why and find what drives you. And that's what that would sound like. Now, a quick tip for you guys watching this video: if you are planning on doing something like this with your department, with your team, it would be beneficial to have an exercise at the end of this. While I didn't necessarily put together a total outline of this, but I can do that, and I will do that if you're interested in it. It would be something like, now that we've talked about this, now that we've learned about the why, I want to give you guys a couple minutes to try to process through that. You may not get through the whole thing right now, but let's put some pens on paper and try to figure it out. Take 5 minutes, put some music on in the background, or it'll be silent, and I want you just to write down the things, this is easy, that excite you and that break your heart. I want you to take that first step into figuring out what your why is and what gets you excited and passionate. And even if it's not for us in this business, in this meeting, I want it to be something that I hope will benefit you in your life personally, that will strengthen your relationships with your spouse, your partner, your kids, whatever it is. Give them some vision, give them some step to go with it, to go forward, because most of the time if we don't have action to go with it, it may be a good 20 minutes hearing from you about finding your why and why that's important, but unless we have something applicable, then it's often not something that stays with us. So if you're interested in figuring out how to break that down, how to have a next step with your team or your department, feel free to hit me up. I'd love to talk to you about that. You can always reach me at my personal email address. That's SeanPatrickDJ@gmail.com, SEAN PatrickDJ@gmail. If you want to see what's going on with me, the cool gigs and events that I've done, the things that I've got coming up, the things that are happening right now, you can always follow me on Instagram at SeanPatrickDJ. And if you're watching this video on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me. I make this content specifically for LinkedIn, and I'd love to be a part of your network. If you've got a speaking gig, a speaking arrangement coming up, and you're a little nervous about it, you need some help, you need some direction, or you want someone to come in and just do it for you, hit me up. I'd love to chat through that with you. You can always find me at SeanPatrickDJ@gmail.com. And until next week, we'll see you on the next episode of What Would That Sound Like?